A very, very good afternoon. If you are, as one of my guests would be, in London, a very good evening, or tumbling into it if you're in South Africa or similar. And good morning or good night if you're somewhere else in the world for this evening's edition of Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows, brought to you from a rather strange location in terms of where we normally are. Not in the cellar, not at a wine farm, not somewhere cool in the winelands. But instead, as I look out the window, probably 10 kilometers, not too much more, from the Lesotho border, where I am for the weekend, which, if you've been watching South Africa's descent into the Arctic Circle over the course of the last weekend, you probably imagine has made for a cold and snowy weekend. In fact, I've just got back from the Golden Gate Park, running around in the snow with my kids, having snowball fights. I think they both have pneumonia, and my wife is not talking to me, but it was great fun. And there's a look at what we discovered when we got down to Kromdraai House, which is a beautifully renovated old farmhouse about halfway between Clarence and Fourierburg. This suggests to me that the Winter Olympics South Africa Lesotho is a very real option on the horizon. Bitterly, bitterly cold, below zero, and so much snow, as you can see, but absolutely beautiful. And there is something about sitting around a hot fire, looking out onto snow-capped mountains, and enjoying the warmth and comfort of being inside while your surrounds are looking so alpine. Made for a really good escape, and a reminder of just how beautiful this part of the world, how beautiful South Africa is. It's been a terrific stay, and it's one that's been complemented by some really good wines. Some of the wine we've got through over the course of the last few days. Some of the Kakibos White. This is Peter Lemmer's white blend. It's a wonderfully layered, textured wine, just the kind of white wine you need for winter. In fact, not dissimilar as a winter wine to some of Ken's iconic FMC. That's the 2018, so a bit of age on it. And again, wine you bite into and get such rich flavor from. Normally you think, well, it's winter, I need a big, heavy red wine. They certainly do work, and I've got one I'll show you in a second. But white wine with a bit of heft to it can do a pretty good job as well. Also had some Hamilton Russell Pinot Noir over the last couple of days, and that was 2016, so 8 years old, and showing that the best of our Pinot Noir can age quite delightfully. We have some of one of our Cape Winemakers Guild members, is Duncan Savage, and his 2020 Follow the Line Cinso. Important to have Duncan's wine in the context of this evening's show, as I will reveal in a moment. And also, I mentioned some of that big, hearty wine. Well, there's some Grand Plaisir from Rose Jordan's estate. That is the 2018. That drank very nicely indeed. And I'm about to try, I haven't had a glass yet, but I've opened some of the 2018 Beerslaad Arbery, who has now left Kanonkop, still playing a helping role where required, but really focusing on his own brand now. And that Beerslaad Pinotage will be a big part of his journey going forward as he makes some exceptional wine. And I'm not sure where that leaves him with the Cape Winemakers Guild. I'll have to find out from our chair, which I can do on this evening's show, because the Cape Winemakers Guild auction is just over a week away, next weekend in Somerset West. One of the great celebrations, not just of South African wine, but world wine, as a selection of quite outstanding winemakers by anybody's mark come together with the very best of their wine and put it up for a charity auction that drives the work of the Guild, it drives the work of the next generation of Guild members, young winemakers coming through, and helps to create this remarkable platform of wine knowledge, wine support that we have here in South Africa, and that which we very happily support and champion on the show today. So Samantha O'Keefe, Madam Chair, is on the show this evening, of Lismore fame, and getting really stuck in, and very happily so, to Cape Winemakers Guild. Andrea Mullineux held a role in the past and remains a very esteemed member of the Guild, is with us. And then we head to London. We haven't had him on the show for a while, but we've managed to track him down between celebrity engagements. Greg Sherwood, Master of Wine, joins us as well. He sampled all of the Guild wines, and by all of them I mean all of them, in London just a few weeks ago. So we'll get his thoughts on what the standout wines are for next weekend's auction, which you can join virtually or in person. I think there are still a few tickets left. Either way, the chance to support a great cause, but also get hold of some terrific wine, and wine that is not going to be widely available. So that's today's show on the eve of Heritage Day, which is why having some of the FMC Shannon was so important, and some Pinotage now, and I've got one more wine I'll show you in a moment. Celebrating Heritage Day tomorrow, celebrating the Cape Winemakers Guild today, that auction coming up, as are our guests in just a moment. First of all, though, here's a quick look at some wine news. Now, this is a party at the Mullineux, and they would love to have you, Andrea, on the show. She's asked me to tell you, if you want to go and stay with her, bring all your family, they'd love to have you. They'd love to have you in Swartland. They'd love to celebrate with you. This is the street party, 1st and 2nd of November, I think it is, the first weekend in November. And it's a chance to go and enjoy a great Swartland party. It is a huge amount of fun, this. And it's supplemented by not just some extraordinary wine, but some of the coolest people in the winelands. There's a laid-back element to the DNA of all of the Swartland producers, whether it's from having grown up there or they've just adopted it in their time. And with Chris and Andrea headlining and so many other terrific Swartland producers joining them, it's going to be one massive party. I'm doing my best to get down there for it. It's going to be terrific. Jump online, track down some tickets, and go and enjoy a really, really special weekend with Team Mullineux, Team Swartland, some great wine, and some even better people. A couple of ex-Animo dinners if you are up in Johannesburg. You can head to Acid for an Intelligo wine. This is wine that's generally slightly left of center, a bit off the beaten track. Jürgen Host making some extraordinary wine, playing around with stuff. So many of our winemakers have that element of the mad scientist to them, but I think in this case, it's slightly more pronounced. The results, though, are terrific. This is as much an adventure in wine as it is a wine and dining evening. Acid itself has got a great atmosphere. It's a lovely spot for an evening out. This one even more so than usual. 580 Rand is just about giving it away. You're going to try some very different wine, some really exciting wine, and do so in some lovely company in a great spot. And then if you're up for a little steak, a night of Nebbiolo, some Barolo, some Barbaresco, some Langhe Nebbiolo. This is on Thursday, and this is the chance to drop in on Che Argentine Grill in Parktown North. It's got an authentically South American feel to it. The meat is terrific, and it's going to be supplemented by some great wine. Not wine we see a huge amount of in South Africa, so this is your chance to get a touch of Italy alongside some Argentinian steak for what promises to be an evening of Latin flair and, more importantly, loads of great fun. And then the Cape Point wine tasting, this is next Tuesday. This is going to be at Norman Goodfellows, the Four Ways Crossing store, and your chance to try some wine from an estate that did a lot to really rework the view of Sauvignon Blanc, place it very much in the premium category, play around with a couple of blends as well, the Islay with a little touch of difference to it. But it continues to be extraordinary wine. Being down in that slightly cooler, slightly more windswept part of the world, you really feel the characteristic of the wine come through very strongly. It's exceptional wine. It's going to be a lovely evening out. And the Norman Goodfellows team and the Cape Point Vineyards team would love to have you the 1st of October. Get your tickets online at Norman Goodfellows. And as always, the nominal fee you pay all goes to charity, helping an animal charity, an animal sanctuary. So you're doing good while drinking great wine. Sounds like a pretty decent evening out to me. Now, I mentioned I had one other wine to try this evening once this is done and the fire roars and the temperature drops, and enjoy my last evening out in the Clarence area. We'll be reversing the normal pattern. I showed you the Beerslot Pinotage, which I'm going to be trying in a moment. We're then going to reverse because everybody else who's with me wanted to try some of this later. And this is some of the Lismore Sauvignon Blanc. And this is going back to 2015, the barrel fermented version. So in honor of our chair of the Cape Winemakers Guild, he's also a great friend and a very welcome supporter of Dan Really Likes Wine. Samantha O'Keefe, lovely to have you back on Dan Really Likes Wine, and a warm welcome. Greatest of welcomes too to Andrea Mullineux. Lovely to have you back on the show. And then from the depths of the cellar in 67 Pall Mall in London, where I think he's locked himself in and is refusing to come out while he works his way through as much vintage first growth as he can before they knock down the door. It's Master of Wine, Greg Sherwood. Welcome, everybody. Lovely to have you on the show. In what's a really, really auspicious fortnight, this. I think it's been a pretty auspicious month because I know the Guild has been hard at work showing off some terrific wine. But it is, Sam, a really great opportunity to put the spotlight on what is, I think, a pretty unique space. I'll get Greg's thoughts on this a little later, but to have so many winemakers who, to the ordinary person, you think, well, surely these guys are competing. This is the Premier League of wine. You won't talk to each other. You can't like each other. You're trying to outdo each other and sell wine. And yet instead it's anything but. You've got this wonderful collective of extraordinary people who in the Guild have this platform that I don't think is like anything else in the wine world.
Yeah, it's so nice to be back. Nice to see everybody. I don't think it's like anything else in the world. You know, we have 41 current members. This will be our 40th auction. It was actually founded, the Cape Winemakers Guild was founded in 1982 as an opportunity to basically come together, taste wine, share ideas, and make better wine. And here we are 42 years later, and there's such an incredible camaraderie in the 41 members that are currently in the Guild. And we're still a group that comes together and tastes the greatest wines in the world and share ideas in order to really make better wine, but ultimately to lift South African wine in general. Brand South Africa is our guiding light, and mentorship is our other guiding light. And so, we're obsessed, and every day we work towards the future of the South African industry, and really working towards making sure that we have a diverse, healthy, and happy industry going forward.
With the focus on the auction, I think that's how a lot of people see the Guild. It's this group that comes together and once a year makes some very special wine and sells it for a good cause. And if it were only that, that would still be a most admirable endeavor. But it's the other 11 and a half months of the year that are arguably even more important, because this is where you do two things that for me are crucial. You work so hard to raise money to afford new entrants into the wine industry the chance to study and to learn, and to not just have their education, but to have their education under the guidance of Guild members. And then it's also the chance for you guys to work together and have this space where I'm battling to get my Verdelho right. Hang on, I know somebody who made some last year. I'll give them a call. Or I'm really struggling to understand the acidity in my wines. Oh, hang on, this person's an expert. I'll give them a shout. Those two elements, not as high profile perhaps as the auction, but so fundamental to what you do and by extension, how they benefit South African wine.
So fundamental. I mean, ultimately, as I think the world knows, in the last 10, 20 years, the quality and the international profile of South African wine has dramatically increased. And that is a direct result of us all working together, not only sharing ideas, but as you say, sharing relationships, introducing each other to people, other winemakers all over the world, wine writers all over the world, and importers. And so I think that we really have an international footprint. And that's a result of us all collaborating, traveling together, sharing together. JD Pretorius, who's the vice chair currently, and I just did a 2.5-week tour in Europe. And it was so extraordinary. People were so surprised that here we were introducing 41 wines from our peers, telling amazing stories about them, encouraging each and every one of the people to enjoy, appreciate, and buy each and every one of these wines. How many other countries do the winemakers stand up and sing the praises of their 41 peers? It's such a great honor. It's a huge responsibility for the two of us, but it really is an incredible opportunity to share the magic and the genius of my colleagues. It's so cool.
Sam, your time with the Guild has been relatively young. You and have been a member for a huge amount of time. Andrea, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you've been there for slightly longer, but as members or otherwise, you've both been watching it for a long time. Andrea, have you seen the Guild grow? Have you seen the impact of the Guild be seen not just on the wine industry, but on the broader wine space in South Africa?
It's just incredible to be part of the guild because it really defines the concept that a rising tide lifts all boats. So it's not just about collaborating together and helping, the next generations together, but it's also about celebrating each other's the achievements that everyone has created as well. So it really is this amazing family of winemakers too, and that then helps you grow further. So I think back to or when I read books, Hemingway, I think of 1920s and the cafes in Paris when Hemingway and like James Joyce and Picasso would get together and collaborate their ideas and what's new and what's going forward. And here were these people from, different countries, all practicing their arts and all encouraging each other to do better. So it's amazing to be kind of part of that at this moment in time in the South African wine industry.
I've been asked a few times in interviews over the last year or so, Dan, would you like to be a winemaker one day? And the answer is no, because you have to get up far too early, where your hours are far too long. It's an enormously difficult job to do with vast amounts of work. But you do get to be part of the Cape Winemakers Guild if you're one of the very best. I think that's the one reason I would love to be, because it is such a cool club, certainly looking from the outside. It's also one that does such really, really good work. And we touched on it a second ago with Sam, just outlined, particularly with the proteges, these young stars coming through, how this works and why this is far more than lip service. This is not just, all right, well, here's a check or here's a chance to come and work in the cellar. Just don't bother us, keep out the way. You really do bring people in and make them part of the fabric of a wine estate for a year. And you really are focused on giving them a proper full wine education.
Absolutely. I mean, the winemaking legacy that we're leaving for tomorrow's generations is being shaped by our actions today. And this isn't a knee-jerk reaction to, the awareness around having more diversity in the wine industry, about, representing the population of South Africa. This is something that started, in 1999. And has been building into the protege program that we have today. And so every year there's around 3 proteges that are chosen, and it's such a rigorous process. I mean, these young adults, from historically disadvantaged backgrounds that really have this aspiration to become a winemaker, they really are the top potential leaders of the wine industry for tomorrow. And they're already the mentors or the role models to the students that are studying winemaking now. And so many of them don't realize that they already fulfilled that position, but that's how incredible they are. So it's a 3-year internship each year with a different member of the Cape Winemakers Guild, a member of their choice. And in the first year, it's, about learning the ropes. There's opportunities to do the Michael Furjong Tasting Academy. There's educations on all different aspects of life. And then, but one of the really exciting things is going into year 2, they get to make their own wine, which goes on auction in their 3rd year, as well as they get to go to Burgundy to further their education, get some international experience. And then when they finish after their 3rd year, they have one of the most incredible CVs of any person in their early to mid 20s in the whole of the wine industry, because they've worked full years under 3 of the top winemakers. They've had their experience abroad, they've had their tasting experiences, and get to participate in these amazing international tastings that we do as members of the Guild. So they're really the shining stars of the future of the wine industry.
You mentioned those proteges, the Shanice Dupré, I think the young Syrah, a young grasshopper Syrah, and Mosima Belebele, who had some Sauvignon Blanc, the Cabana Sauvignon Blanc. Those are both on the protege auction this year. Just 2 more of this wave of talent that is sweeping into the South African wine industry, and we'll benefit from that. Greg Sherwood, lovely to have you back on the show. You've been tasting the Guild wines. We'll get your thoughts on them a little later. Just give us some context, as per my suggestion to Sam, that there was nothing quite like this in the world. How unique is the Cape Winemakers Guild? How special an organization is it?
Hi, Dan. Greetings from 67 Pall Mall, the mecca of wine in London. Yeah, it's quite, I've been super kind of interested in following, obviously, the Cape Winemakers Guild, and they've always got all their big shots, as chairman, many of them friends over the years. And, it's gone through all these phases from a kind of winemaking side, as well as a kind of development and opportunity side for the protege. It's really developed since the 80s, and certainly back in the day, we looked at it very much from the fine wine trade as it was looked as the kind of the best barrel that these producers made. And then maybe kind of 10 years ago, it slowly started to evolve into something with a little bit more kind of interest, a little bit more kind of depth, a little bit more thinking. And I think the whole program was obviously evolving as well. The whole development of proteges and helping the community and just a broader outreach. And then it became a lot more kind of, there was a bit more experimental kind of feel to the wines, a little bit more, some of the winemakers, they could maybe do something a little bit more outlandish than their top cuvées. It wasn't just the best barrel from their cellar. And I think now we've reached a new third era where it's a kind of a melange of certainly the best wines these producers can make, but certainly targeted at a much more interesting fine wine audience. Certainly, certainly from the UK, with people like Border Index being one of the biggest buyers. We're seeing a kind of CWG, evolving into a kind of an offering that really can fulfill some serious fine wine buying needs here in the UK. A lot of these bigger merchants, are not really able to kind of tuck into the regular releases. So for them to promote these wines to their fine wine buyers as some of the really greatest and most premium quality wines available in the country, super rare, super sought after. You can't buy them in the high street. It's kind of moved to another era, and kind of these things just click along organically. And and the fine wine industry here has very much embraced that, and it's great to see. And it's great to see them getting so involved and their clientele and private client base in what is quite a slow and sticky market this past year. Certainly still hopefully being very, very interested in tasting the wines in all the fantastic events that have been done in London. Summit 67, I did the fantastic trade event here with Sam, Uncle Gary and JD Pretorius. It was a fantastic event and got to taste some incredible wines. So it's super exciting, and it's for me it's great to see it all evolving, not just staying as this kind of old boys, old girls kind of just premium produce. It is always evolving. They're bringing in new producers. The outreach to for development and with the proteges is always, they're always thinking, what else can we do? And I think it's just absolutely fantastic. It's a dynamic organization. You've got so many kind of passionate people running it. So it's great to see how it's evolved over, certainly the past 2 decades plus, into something that's very exciting and is being completely embraced by the fine wine community, certainly in the UK, but I think across Europe.
It's lovely to see so many people watching the show at the moment. Gordon Newton-Johnson watching, a key member of the Guild. Angela Lloyd is on, Derek Prout-Jones, amongst others, all watching over on Instagram. Great to have you with us, guys. The work then, as you can see, of the Guild is so important. It's having such an impact. What of the quality of the wine? Well, before we go to the winemakers themselves, Greg, give us the very briefest of sketches of the wines you've been through. You had a look. What was your overall sense of what was standing out, what the general quality of this year's offering is?
Okay, I think this year it's a little bit interesting because normally the CWG would do like one trade press tasting for a few lucky journos and a few kind of key trade people or influencers, etc. This year there've been quite a few events trying to do a bit more outreach to the merchants, and certainly I've had feedback from private clients who will buy and buy every year and are looking to buy. So it's an interesting feedback. I think certainly my impressions, the reds are just fantastic. Quite a lot of 21s, which are just what an incredible vintage. It's quite Vendegaard year, so those are all quite serious wines. There's a few 22s and some 20s. The whites, I was saying to Sam earlier off camera that I've had a few customers say they thought the whites were fantastic, but this is probably one of the first year they've had a good taste where they thought the reds might have kind of almost be kind of edging ahead of the reds, and we talk about South Africa, the whites are always so great, the reds need to play catch up generally in our industry. But I think this year, I think we're seeing a turning tide where the reds are just absolutely fantastic and standing where they should. I don't know if you want, I can give you a few little highlights for me. Certainly, I picked out a few. Certainly, Arbery Swan Song, what not to love about a great Canon Corp CWG Pinotage, just classic. And of course his, but I love his CWG Pulsar. It's just that little bit different as always to his regular Pulsar Cuvée. Certainly going to be obviously shooting the lights out at the auction. I loved Andrea's Cab Franc, really performed beautifully. Helderberg Cab Franc, just a cool climate. Christo doesn't need any more kind of pushing. His wines are already so blockbuster, but the Lariche Cabernet Reserve was just shot the lights out. Duncan's Syrah, I tasted it next to Sam's Syrah. The Lismore was both of them really cracker, just absolutely fantastic. And then Miles Mossop, if you spent less time surfing and more time in a suit, maybe people would, they think he's a Syrah, but his wines were absolutely incredible, absolutely fantastic. And then I'm going to give a special mention because it's not, I don't know him well and I don't know the wines well, but Kuni Sneeman, I thought his wine was a real surprise and standout for me. They're obviously, and I can't obviously leave without saying well done to the Cap Classiques, because I think John Lopesher, who helped me a lot in my dissertation for IMW on Cap Classique production, and obviously Bubbles Ferreira, two fantastic wines. And just people maybe think white wines, red wines at the auction, but you could those are two fantastic bubbles, and I'm sure there's a few others, but a great selection, really, really, very solid. But I think the reds might have it this year. The reds have it.
Well, speaking of red, speaking of Arbery and his Swan Song, I'm drinking that 2018 Beerslaw, and it is extraordinary. If this is the kind of wine, if you're one of those people who has bought into the questionable rhetoric around Pinotage, well, this will remove any doubts from your mind. The only thing with it at 2018, I've opened it too early. It is still wound up. It's still tight. Certainly delightful to drink, but it's got a lot of time to unfurl. And thankfully, I think I've got one more at home, which I'll hang on to a little longer. Sam, before I ask you for some of your thoughts on a few of your peers and their wines, very quickly give us the process for people to whom this is not a familiar space. We understand it is your best wine. How exactly does it work? Who chooses the wine? How much of it do you produce? How does all of this work with the Guild?
So the way that it works is that, first of all, just who is a member. You asked about Arbery. When the guidelines for membership is that when a winemaker is considered at the top of their game, currently we use international measures as well as South African measures. They then become eligible, and they have to be the person who is solely responsible for the final quality of the wine in the business. And they are in a position to continue to make world-class wine going forward. And then somebody who also carries the values as a member. So it is actually the winemaker, not the brand, who is the member of the Guild. So we have many situations where a winemaker became a member when they were part of a very famous, very successful brand. and then they left that brand to do their own thing, or maybe even move to another farm. JD was at Steenberg, and then now he's at Warwick. But it is his seat because he is the winemaker who is responsible for world-class wine. So in Aubrey's case, Aubrey's leaving Kennecott to focus on his own brand. He's doing incredible work with Wisla. And this will be, as you mentioned, the final Kennecott for a while. You know, perhaps someday another winemaker from Kennecott will become a member. But until then, this 40th auction of the Cape Winemakers Guild has the very last Kennecott Paul Sour and Kennecott Pinotage available. So that's very exciting. So the way that it works is that a winemaker makes what is metaphorically a barrel, but it, on average is about 300 bottles, about 50 cases. 400 liters is what actually gets bottled, more or less, and of a very special cuvee to them. Now, some winemakers like Aubrey and, let's say, Gary Jordan choose to do an elite cuvee from their famous cuvee, like the Jordan Sophia or the Paul Sour. Other winemakers choose to do something more experimental. Sebastian Beaumont is famous for this. He always does something really avant-garde and out there, and it's always world-class and amazing. Andrea obviously does her Semillon Gris not every year, but occasionally. So every winemaker has the ability to choose what they're going to put on auction. It's submitted to the membership. Then there are panels set up of winemakers who specialize in a certain category. Let's take Chardonnay Pinot Noir, for example. And then the wines are tasted blind. They're sent to the lab, so they've already been cleared. Technically, they're perfect. There's no faults that can be picked up in a lab. And then a panel of their peers will review the wines blind, and it either goes forward or not. And, you know, most of the time, if the wines do not go forward, it's not so much that there's a problem with the wine. It's maybe the panel recommends that the wine is very young, and then let's maybe review and ask the winemaker to put it back on next year. But so it's a rigorous process. The wines who make it on to the Guild auction have been basically chosen by the membership in specialist panels, and are exciting, limited lots that cannot be gotten anywhere else in the world.
And they are available at the auction next weekend, including wines by Sam. Now, you are the chair, therefore, logically, Samantha O'Keefe, you must produce the best wine of the entire auction. The world is watching you. There is enormous pressure on you to deliver something absolutely sensational that blows all the other winemakers out the water and does your title justice. What have you decided to produce for this year's auction?
Yeah, it is a lot of pressure, but it's not because it's not because of my own wines. It's because of the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, as the chair, I'm responsible to make sure that all of our 41 members gets as much attention and love and focus as my own wines. But I have once again put on a Valkyrie Chardonnay, which is a selection from my coolest vineyard in Grayton, and the Sheltering Sky Syrah, which is a very special vineyard in Elgin. So that is what I've chosen to put on this year. But there's some really exciting wines. I mean, an interesting take this year is that, you know, I think wines go through phases, and maybe 20 years ago, there were lots of Sauvignon Blancs. And then obviously we went through a phase where we were very Chenin heavy. There are 8 Chardonnays on auction this year. So there's a renaissance of Chardonnay happening, and that's very exciting. Obviously we've got the last 2 Kennecotts on auction. That's thrilling. And, you know, one thing that's very special, I've given you the criteria of what is required for a member to be put forth for the Guild, but we have a couple of multi-generational winemakers. So we have Christo Lariche, whose father Etienne was one of our family founding members, and Renan Bormann. He has an epilogue. His father was also a historic member who stepped down a couple of years ago. So they were inducted in their own right based on their own accomplishments. But it's really, really exciting to just see the generations pass on the quality and the legacy of the Guild. So that's very cool this year.
It is indeed a star-studded collection, and I used to get so excited seeing the names, let alone the wine. Speaking of names, I see Richard Rushton is watching as well. Richard, lovely to have you on. A huge player for many years in the wine industry, and now a semi-professional mountain biker. Andrea, there's a little pressure on you as well, I think, for the auction, given you have I've lost count of the number of Global Winemaker of the Year titles and Plateau Winery of the Year and 6 stars and 103 points from Greg Sherwood and everything else the Mullineux won, and that's just this year. What has Team Mullineux decided is going to be flying the flag in 2024?
Gosh, well, I mean, I have 2 wines on auction this year, but they're 2 of 4 dozen amazing wines that are on auction this year. I mean, there's really just so many good ones. As Greg was saying, you know, the reds are shining, the whites are historically amazing. But I do have 1 red and 1 white on this year. So I don't know if you can see that at all. You can see that the wines for the guild are all bottled under a Cape Winemakers Guild label. So they have the name of the winemaker on them. They have they might have the brand that the winemaker works for on them as well, just to give a little bit of extra recognition to the people buying it. But they all have unique Cape Winemakers Guild logos on it. So it's a little bit of a flex when someone puts that on their table at a restaurant or opening it up for friends at home. Yeah, so I have 2 wines on this year. One is we call it the Gris. So it's an old vine vineyard planted in 1960 on the granite slopes of the Paardeberg. Semillon Gris was a variety that was first recognized in South Africa in the early 1800s, and by the mid 1800s made up 45% of all vineyards in South Africa were at one point Semillon Gris. But then as varieties like Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon came in, and you know, with the replanting of all the vineyards post-phylloxera, Semillon Gris has almost disappeared. There's only 7 recognized vineyards in South Africa, and there's none recognized anywhere else in the world. So even Jancis Robinson refers to Semillon Gris as a South African phenomenon. And so when I first started putting the Semillon Gris on auction in 2014 was my first release of a Cape Winemakers Guild wine. I wanted it to be something of historical significance, something incredibly rare. And as Samantha said, it's the wine that I've had most often on the auctions. It's become its own sort of little brand, the Semillon Gris that I make. And then I also have a Cabernet Franc planted on the east-facing slopes of Franschhoek. So very cool morning sun, very long, slow ripening. And this vineyard is very special to me because it's something that we planted when we started our Liu Passant winery in Franschhoek. And so I've had 4 protégés in that time, and each of them have helped me in that vineyard, helped make the wine, because most of the protégés that I've had have actually worked with me at my Liu Passant winery in Franschhoek. So it's very sentimental for me in that so many people have been on the journey with me.
And that journey culminates in some terrific wine. One of the sadnesses for me this year being traveling to America, as things would have it, was I missed out on the tastings of this year's Guild wines, but I've done it many times over the years, and it's kid in a toy store stuff because you just get so dazzled. Even I'd imagine if you are the great Greg Sherwood, who spends 17 hours a day drinking wine most of us can only ever dream of, is there still, Greg, when you run through a range like this, somebody who gets to taste the best wine in the world week in, week out, do you still get a few butterflies? Do you still get that kick of excitement that here is from your home country a selection of wine that I assume from what you've said so far, it is wine that can compete with some of the very best in the world?
Absolutely, Dan. Nothing has changed. Maybe, as I described, the slight kind of stylistic phase of the guild over the kind of decades, but going from, you know, just that kind of punchy big barrel to experimentation to now it's just literally the very finest and most sophisticated they can offer, with a little bit of difference. I think what we're going to see definitely, as I alluded to slightly earlier, is with some of the very big fine wine merchants who drive most of the fine wine trade around the world in a certain essence, and certainly on a trickle-down effect, with a lot of them getting very involved in the guild and then buying on behalf of or for and selling to their big private clients. These are wines that are going to be on the top tables of the world alongside the Romani Contis and the First Growths. I mean, these people don't mess about. If they're buying, they're buying the best, and they've been hooked by the idea of these wines being some of the best in the world, being very limited availability and extremely good quality. So, and of course the wines deliver, so that the wines have to deliver, and they do, and they always have. So I think that's very exciting. And I think what that factor now with a lot of these big fine wine brokers and merchants being quite participatory in the auction, you're going to see how these wines then filter through into the private client trade and onto dinner party tables and into fine private members clubs, and how they pop up on tables alongside other great wines. And people think, actually, what was your best wine of the night? Well, it was probably that Semillon Gris, or that Syrah from Lismore, or that Chardonnay from so-and-so. And that is game changer stuff. That is, paradigm changing, mentality changing. And that is not something that necessarily was happening that much, maybe 5 to 8, 10 years ago, but it's certainly happening now, because these wines are a unique opportunity for a specific niche of the market to promote the very best to people who want to drink the very best, and that's incredibly exciting. So we're going to see where that's going to go. I just want to say, speaking of Andrea, that the incredible excellence of fruit and wines coming through from Franschhoek. I mean, I'm sure we can all remember just a few years ago the controversy of every Franschhoek winery wanting to join WO Pal and say, well, we don't want to put Franschhoek on the label because nobody thinks it's quality wine. Now, I mean, the Semillon, the Chardonnay, the Cabernet. I just drank a bottle of Stony Brook Ghost Gum 21 the other day. It was just incredible. Cabernets from, Chardonnays, and just all sorts from Franschhoek wine of origin, Franschhoek grapes, whether they're recently planted like Andrea's Cap Franc, or whether they may be some older, more historic Semillon, Chardonnay kind of vineyards, old vines, Sauvignon Blanc like Terre Passible, which Adam Mace is making. I mean, it's so exciting to see wines like that. But it's incredibly exciting, and I think for all the good work the CWG does on the protégé side, I think we're going to start seeing a different level of engagement from the fine wine community and from fine wine consumers with this great involvement from the fine wine trade, and that will inevitably have a trickle-down effect into the kind of regular brands of all these producers. So that's very, very exciting.
And another real benefit of how the Cape Winemakers Guild auction plays out. I'm looking to invest in this particular auction. I cannot buy everything. Otherwise, what is left of my children's university fund will finally be depleted. But there are a few cases I'd like to get. So I'm going to ask of all three of you a couple of recommendations, maybe 2 whites and 2 reds from each of you, and throw in a bubbles as well if you'd like. I know this is a difficult one because A, there's so much good wine, and B, you don't want to upset any of your colleagues by not picking their wine, but maybe something that's a little different, something a little more unexpected, a little more unusual, somewhere from a slightly different area, one of our newer guild members. I'll leave it up to you guys, but I'll start with you, Greg, because you've done it quite so recently. Give me a couple of whites, couple of reds, maybe a bubbles as well. I know you mentioned John Loebscher in the latest edition, The Big Dog, so perhaps that is it. But what am I scribbling down on my wish list and then hoping to outbid the rest of the world on at the Nedbank Cape Winemakers Guild auction next weekend?
Well, it's super difficult, but I can only go on kind of wow factor from the tasting. And on the whites, I'm afraid I'm going to have to, I don't know if I can afford it, but I'd certainly like a case or 2 of the Mullineux Gris. It was really seductive, just musclade and perfume. There was just everyone next to me was just looking at you, kind of with the wine in the mouth, going, "Wow, wow," which is quite, English trade. Another white. Well, I think I'm gonna go for, apparently it's the 10th and maybe last vintage of the John Lobsher Sparkling. So I'm not sure about that. That's what he alluded to me. But what an incredible wine! Just so exciting, and just another kind of wow wine. Just like, wow, how good is that? Wow. Amongst just an incredible array of wines. On the reds. I'm sorry. I do love a good Syrah, but I am a Bordeaux man at heart, and I'm gonna err on the side of caution and go a little bit of Crystal Riche and a little bit of Swan Song Paul Sau, I'm afraid. Call me crusty, call me boring, but those would be my kind of star picks if I could afford them.
All right, well, those go straight onto my list. The downside, of course, of asking people like Greg and Samantha and Andrea about wine is that lots of people watch this show. They therefore get some advice, and the wine I then want to buy has tripled in value by the time we get to the end of the auction. Andrea, what's on the list? What do you think might be great value, might be a really great discovery, might be the kind of wine that if I buy next weekend and hang on to for a decade, I can drink half of it and use the other half to buy a holiday home in the Bahamas?
No, I mean, I'm really excited about Kuni Snijman's new project. He left Rust and Frida a couple of years ago, and so now to have his own personal wines on auction, it's just the next level. It's from his heart, it's from his soul, and it's something he's been working towards for a long time. Renan Borman's Bosch Klub Epilogue Syrah is epic. It is really incredible. This finesse and this, it just dances on your tongue. It's really incredible. Samantha's Chardonnay has so much complexity and so much muscle, but not in a heavy way. It's incredible, the length and the elegance to it at the same time. Absolutely gorgeous. And I cannot talk about the wines without talking about one of the sparkling wines. So because John Lobsher was already mentioned, I'm going to mention Peter Ferreira. I mean, these wines just pack so much pleasure. The Cap Classiques of South Africa really are truly awesome investments.
That sounds like another really, really good selection. On to Madam Chair. Samantha, I think a lot of the winemakers quietly have their own eye out on a few cases at the auction. If, hypothetically speaking, you were bidding, what would be on your list that I can add to mine?
Always on my list is Gordon Newton-Johnson's Sanford Chardonnay. It is absolutely stunning. It's so delicious young. It's got this Burgundian edge to it that just makes my brain explode, but it's a wine that definitely will age a good 10 or 20 years if that's what you're looking for. It's amazing. Miles Mossip's Saskia Joe is absolutely gorgeous. It's a white blend. It was so delicious, and I was super proud showing it off. The Jordan Sophia was one of my absolute highlights. I mean, in a lineup of some of Stellenbosch's best cabs and Bordeaux reds, the Jordan Sophia was elegant and fresh and textured, and again, showing beautifully now. But I've been honored to be able to taste that wine with 10, 20 years of age. And it's an incredible wine that ages beautifully. And then Duncan Savage, his Syrah is always a favorite of mine. I was going to say some of the ones that Greg and Andrea mentioned. So Duncan Savage's Syrah, fantastic. And the Paul Sauer and the Pinotage have been mentioned, but again, just another note, it's the last vintage. So anybody who is a collector can at least try to get one of those last bottles on auction for a while. So yeah, those are my highlights.
I can see prices spiraling. This is not good for me, but it is good for the guild and for the funds being raised for it. Before we wrap up, and we've flown through the show, which is always the case when you've got such terrific guests. Greg, very quickly, which I know is always a challenge for the extremely well-spoken Mr. Sherwood, just what this, in conclusion, says about the South African wine industry. You've already spoken about how it's raising the profile, but when we see our top wine going for what for us in South Africa are very high prices next weekend, set against top Burgundy or Bordeaux, maybe not quite so, but there does seem year by year to be a sense that we are closing the gap little by little on those prices, and also closing the gap on the perception in the wine industry of where top South African wine sits versus top wine from some of the other old world producers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to echo the Jordan, Sophia. I had a lot of private clients who went to tastings, picking out the Sophia as really benchmark, and wow, the Saskia, Joe, again on the really, and Rhiannon doesn't need any more kudos. Everyone knows the epilogue is it's just ridiculous. So we don't need to up the price any further. But I think what the auction will do now is you'll see those big players paying the prices. We're not talking mainstream here. We're talking fine wine trade. We're talking brokers. We're talking supplying wines to some of the wealthiest collectors in the world, not just in the UK. They are buying these wines. They're interested in these wines. It's a game changer. These people will be drinking these wines with a wide circle and network of people. That's a game changer. And we've not seen really anything like it, the interest in these wines. But now they're realizing how small the production is, how high the quality is, and how finite they are, and what niche they are, and how perfect it is just for that fine wine market. So it's a real game changer. We'll see it filtering through to the broader industry, which is very exciting for all of us and for a kind of wider group of producers. But I'm very excited, and I think you can see some fireworks at this auction, even in these slightly slightly flat economic times. I think we're going to see some fireworks, and people have got money, but they're just very careful what they spend it on. And if I would certainly see people putting their hands in their wallets for some of the top Cape Winemakers Guild wines, because you're not going to get them anywhere else.
I will be sitting in Scotland watching this online. Maybe I'll just convert it to pounds. It'll seem a lot cheaper if I'm bidding therein. Andrea, as we head into this auction, how much of a measure of the health of the South African wine industry is the success of specifically the Nedbank Cape Winemakers Guild auction, but broadly speaking, the success of the guild, and how bullish are you about South African wine at the moment?
I mean, it's really the most exciting time in the history of South African wine to be part of this industry. It's something that, is something that we all truly believe, because there's so much interest and so much focus on what's happening in South Africa, and the wines are absolutely delivering. So right now we're seeing South African wine being put on the world stage that it deserves to be on. And to have an auction like the Cape Winemakers Guild auction getting so much attention from around the world, people literally buying from, multiple continents, multiple states and provinces from around the world, it really shows the attention on the finest of South African wine, which is what's being produced by the Cape Winemakers Guild members.
I love the positive sentiment. It really is so good to hear. Oh, South Africa at the moment, we do seem, he says cautiously, to be in a more promising space than we've been for some time, and wine is very much part of that. As I prepare to get my slightly aged Lismore Sauvignon Blanc, I'm really excited about drinking this for dinner this evening. Sam, before I get a wrap up from you as chair of the auction as a whole, just give me a thought, if you will, on this protege auction, because I think it means a lot more than people realize. This is an opportunity for us as the wine drinking public to meet some of the rising stars, the new generation of winemaking greats. But it's also a really important platform to give young people a boost in the right direction, and to give these young winemakers the confidence to take the next step in their winemaking careers.
That's exactly right. I mean, we are so excited about the 40th annual auction itself, and we expect it to knock it out of the park. But I'd really like to draw people's attention to the Cape Winemakers Guild Protege auction. If you go online and you look at the catalog, the first half of the catalog are all of the lots that will be on actual auction on the 4th and 5th of October. But currently running online, the second half of that catalog is all 100% for the benefit of the Protege program. It's older wines. You have the 15 barrel fermented Sauvignon Blanc right now. That wine is absolutely singing. We produce wines that age so well. We've got verticals, big, large formats that have been donated by our members. Experiences for those of you who actually have the stomach to have lunch with Duncan Savage. He's auctioning himself off in that auction. It's currently online. It runs until the Monday after the auction. So you just go online, you put your bid in, you might be able to get a bargain, you might not, but just know that all of it goes for the benefit of the Protege program. And as we've said, the richness that is brought into this program, the skills, the experiences, sorry about my camera, that these young people have the opportunity to experience, that we are really building the leaders of the future. It's not just experienced winemakers. It is investing in the leadership of South African wine. And so it's a cause that is so worthy, but there's some seriously cool stuff. Second half of the Cape Winemakers Guild auction catalog, you can find it online on the Cape Winemakers Guild website, and that is currently running, and you can just quietly check in and kind of increase your bid. And it's a fun thing to participate in, even if you don't have the opportunity to bid against Bordeaux Index. So there you go.
And you're going to find some real gems there. And if they are selling Duncan Savage, we'll expect Angela Lloyd to be front of that particular queue. Guys, thank you so much. I must, Samantha, Andrea, tell you that I spent the majority of August in America on holiday with the Rand, which was very rewarding. And the word I got time and again when I was at a fine dining restaurant, when I managed to stick my head in at a wine bar or visit anywhere connected to the wine industry, was what's it going to cost to get Samantha and Andrea back? I had to tell them that you are priceless and we are not giving you back because you remain two of our greatest assets, and you reminded us of that this evening. So to Andrea, Samantha, thank you so much, and to Greg Sherwood as well, joining us all the way from London. You still haven't got out of that Pall Mall cellar. Good luck to them extracting you. And I think most importantly, thank you to all three of you, because such a big part of the success of our wine industry is, yes, we've got a great terroir, we've got some fabulous grapes and varietals and wonderful weather, etc. But our key asset, above all, by a distance, and I challenge anyone to a fight over this, is our people. And you three are the best. You're wonderful champions of what we do, and you showcase the very best of our industry. So thank you to all of you. Best of luck with the auction next weekend. Samantha, Andrea, thank you for the work that the Guild continues to do, will be doing. And Greg, keep flying that flag for South African Wine high in between your 11 complimentary lunches a day in the wine industry in London. Guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time, and good luck next weekend.
Cheers, Dan. Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Cheers, Dan.
Cheers.
So there we go. Samantha O'Keefe, Andrea Mullineux, and Greg Sherwood making for an all-star trio, along in absentia with Arbri Birsla. And I'm going to be moving on to some of Sam's wine. And lest Andrea feel left out, well, we've got some Mullineux lined up over dinner at Koi in Cape Town tomorrow night. And possibly at Buscool as well for an evening in Cape Town. Thank you all so much for joining us. Do go online, have a look at that Protege auction, have a look at the auction itself. You're in for some treats if you get bidding, some great investments, but also putting some money the way of a really good cause. That does it. I'm off to my fire, some more pinotage, and the last of a great break in Clarence. It's the Nedbank Cape Winemakers Guild auction next weekend. Good luck to everyone involved. Happy bidding, happy drinking. Goodbye.